Hello, and welcome to the Disability Myth. My name is Dominic, and I live with a fatal disease called spinal muscular atrophy. Together, my amazing caretaker, co-host, and best friend, Uriel, and I plan to debunk misconceptions, share our personal experiences, and shatter your expectations. But we're not stopping there. We're bringing in experts, thought leaders, and everyday people who are smashing through societal barriers, paving the way for a more inclusive world. Whether you're tuning in to learn, empathize, or simply to be entertained, the show promises to be an eye-opening experience that transcends boundaries. Because when it comes down to it, what makes us different is what makes us extraordinary.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Disability Myth. I am, of course, your handsome and humble host, Dominic Trevethan. Alongside me, as usual, is the equally handsome and humble Uriel. And today, we probably have an even more handsome and humble guest somehow in my good friend, Genevieve Werner, or Jen, as I like to call her, since I've known her since 2015. My friend Jen here is a 23-year-old second-year grad student who is earning her Master's of Science in Clinical Psychology. In other words, she's more intelligent than me and Uri combined. And she also happens to be diagnosed with the same condition that I have, type 2 SMA.
Yep, give it up for Dom. He's been my wheeled brethren.
Oh, yeah. We also have, in fact, that we were born and raised, have in common, I should say, that we were born and raised in Ventura, California. She's also passionate about writing, traveling, making friends, and of course, psychology. I can also vouch for the fact that she is a certified geek and has been since about 14 years old. So, with all of that being said, I figured Jen would be an awesome person to help us dispel the myth that people with disabilities are unable to succeed academically. And this myth is troublesome because it perpetuates this misconception that individuals living with disabilities are inherently less capable of achieving academic or even professional success compared to the non-disabled peers. However, this myth, like the others that we will continue to cover on this podcast, is just that. It's a myth. And so people with disabilities can and often do excel in various educational and career paths.
However, physically disabled students happen to remain drastically underrepresented in higher education, as portrayed by some of the latest statistics. I wonder why. The rate of disabled college student enrollment ranges between 1.1% and 15.1%, depending on the disability type, with mobility and dexterity disabilities at 1.5%, according to the NCHA, or the National College Health Assessment of 2022. With all that being said, we'd like to address some questions to explore your insights as physically disabled students who have attended college away from home. First off, tell us more about your field and why you chose to study it.
Yeah, sure. So I first recognized my interest in the field of psychology when I was 14, a freshman in high school. I also was attending college courses at the community college for credits throughout high school. So I was able to have the opportunity to take abnormal psychology my freshman year. And I did. And my professor was really amazing and really passionate. And she kind of cemented my already existing passion for the subject. And then, after some later self reflection in my teenage years, I was able to recognize that my affinity towards psychology had actually began much younger than I was aware of. From about the age of 3, I remember there being a lot of dysfunction in my home and in my family. I grew up in what some of you may consider to be a broken home. My parents separated when I was almost 4, but not quite 4, and that was in 2004. And then from there, we never really had the type of familial normalcy in our home after that. There were drastically different dynamics that me and my siblings at a very young age had to learn how to navigate. And I became extremely aware of emotions, their meanings, how they affect people, and all of the other social dynamics that I was experiencing in that turbulent environment. And then I, in some ways, didn't get the guidance that I felt that I needed to cope with that from others. So I actually ended up coming up with ways to cope that nobody else had really taught me, but seemed to work for me. And I found that, if I could pull myself out of a dark place, maybe I could help empower others to do the same. Because remaining in that dark place, I can say for a fact that I would not have been able to accomplish all the things that I have been today.
And Dom, tell us more about your field and why you chose it if you
Well,
could.
damn, I don't know if I can after that story. That hit home. I think a lot of our audience will be able to relate to a story like that. Thank you for being so candid, Jen. That was awesome. I actually started out as a psychology major as well. Funny enough, I'm a bit of a failed psych major. I knew I wanted to help others in circumstances similar to my own, those that are, living with physical disabilities, maybe even some other types of disabilities. And so what ended up happening was I realized I sucked at math when I got to college, and knowing that I would need a lot of math, a lot of statistics to be able to excel in psych, I decided to change my major to communication studies. And I landed on comm because people have always kind of told me that I'm a really strong communicator. People like my nurses always have told me that. And it kind of makes sense to me because I'm always telling people what I need and how to get what I need. And so, because of that social skill I developed at a really young age as a result of my SMA, I think it's really um, helped me land on being a communication major. And that's why I chose it.
Where did you choose to attend and why, Genevieve?
Yeah, so I ended up attending California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks. And some of the factors that went into that decision were that the campus is only about 45 minutes away from my parents' homes in Ventura, California. And I understood that that was extremely important and in many ways essential because I have to rely on other people almost 24/7 for my physical care needs. So if there was any type of breach in my care staff, we would need a family member or somebody who could fill in. And other factors that went into me choosing that school were that although it was a private school, I had the academic achievement in high school to qualify for pretty large scholarships that would allow me to afford it, even more so than affording a uh, University of California university. So, like the UCs, even. And then I also had some prior experience staying there. When I was in high school, the summer between freshman and sophomore year, I was selected to attend a youth leadership seminar for ASB, and I got the chance to spend nights here in the dorm, attend, meetings at lecture halls for our group, participate in activities, and really see, you know, all that the campus has to offer. So I definitely had a little bit of familiarity with it, and they were also branded as a liberal arts university. And I found that that was particularly important because I did not want to be educated under the capital mindset. I wanted to be educated under the humanitarian mindset.
No. Dominic.
Yeah. So right out of high school, I went to UCLA, and one of the main reasons why was because I actually applied to UCSB and Cal State Channel Islands as my backups, and got denied at UCSB and waitlisted somehow at Channel Islands, but got into UCLA. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And so I went to UCLA, ecstatic about it, knowing that they had a really good psych program. And the only hang up was my nursing situation wasn't perfect there. So I ended up moving back home to attend community college. And after getting my AA in community college, I transferred to Arizona State University online, where I got my bachelor's. But the real reason I went to UCLA to begin with was because it's felt somewhat familiar to me. Like I was saying earlier, um, I wanted to help people with experiences similar to mine. And that stemmed from an experience I had at UCLA in the hospital, recovering from a spinal fusion surgery when I was 13. So I was already kind of familiar with the campus, and for lack of, a better word, comfortable with it. So just to kind of clarify, I went to UCLA, then Allen Hancock Community College, and then ASU online. So yeah.
What's your average day look like as a university student, Jen?
Yeah, so these days I wake up somewhat early, around 8:30, and the first thing that I have to do is take some medications and get disconnected from the equipment that I use at nighttime. I have a caregiver that comes in every morning at 7 a.m. and she waits for me to wake up and then assists me from there. So we have to do that little routine. Then she has some equipment that she needs to wash. Then I have to use the bathroom, get assistance taking a shower, getting dressed, doing my hair, um, all the normal things that every college girl has to worry about, but you essentially have someone to assist you. And this is, I think, a complicated relationship to um, navigate because you are trying to fulfill responsibilities that you have as a student and as an adult and as a young person living independently away from home. I left home right after high school when I was 18 and have been living away at school ever since. And on top of having to manage my care team, I also had to assume responsibility for all of the health concerns that my parents had supported me through during my childhood. So a lot of responsibilities were added onto my plate in a relatively short period of time. There was definitely an adjustment period of about 6 months before I felt truly comfortable and like I could manage and handle and stay on top of all of these responsibilities.
Uh, Dominic?
Yeah, so my days would typically start pretty early. And I think I'll kind of answer this from the perspective of being a student at UCLA as opposed to just online, because I know not everybody has, the luxury of doing online school. So yeah, when I was at UCLA, I would typically wake up pretty early, especially when I had days with classes in the mornings, which I usually did. And so my day would typically start probably around 8 or 9 a.m. My nurse would help me use the restroom, get dressed, a lot like what Jen was saying, except not really needing to get my hair done or anything. Just run a comb through it. And after that was done, I would start doing my breathing treatments, which take 20 to 30 minutes. That involves hooking up my nebulizer to my trach and letting me do my albuterol and budesonide treatments. After that, those are done, I have my nurse clean and change my gauze that are under my trach and my G tube. For any audience members that don't really know me that well, I do have a trach, I do have a G tube. Thankfully, I don't have to use the G tube too much, and I'm able to breathe unassisted during the daytime, just needing the ventilator attached to my trach at night when I sleep. But yeah, the first year I lived in one of the farthest res halls from campus at UCLA, courtside. And so courtside, when you stepped out of courtside to get to the lecture halls, it was a process of about a 30-minute stroll. And so that just kind of adds to the time that I would need to take in the morning to get ready. But usually once I got to classes, it was pretty smooth sailing. I would get set up with my iPad, type up my notes, and then go to my other classes, rinse and repeat until I was done. And when I was done, I would usually either do one of two things: go to the res hall for some food or go back to my dorm to use the restroom, because there's no way I could go while attending classes since I need to lie down to be able to use my urinal and or my bedpan. And so, yeah, typically I would use the restroom after class, go get food, come back to my dorm, work on some coursework, some reading for a few hours, maybe take a rest, play some Madden. And then yeah, that was pretty much my day. But of course, like Jen was saying, you have to be able to ride this difficult balance between maintaining your physical health and keeping up with the demands of school. One of the stories I like to tell people is I had this nurse named, I won't say his actual name for the sake of, privacy, but I'll call him Stan. And Stan was from Brazil and he had a really heavy Brazilian accent. And I was like the only person who understood him, his English, because I spent so much time with him, being that he was my nurse. And so I would have to translate whatever he said to the nurse that he was switching shifts with every night he worked. And so that whole process was another 30 minutes that took away from, whatever I had going on, like reading or coursework, whatnot. So yeah, I think that kind of just, I hope, gives you guys as an audience an idea of how nuanced our days can be. Yeah.
So, Dominic, I'm curious, what did your average day at UCLA look like versus completing university courses remotely? How are those two experiences different?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely felt like taking courses at ASU online and even Hancock because of COVID was allowed me a lot more flexibility than I had at UCLA. I also had I also had fewer time constraints clashing with my health needs, just due to the nature of I could always be at home and at school at the same time doing online. So if I had to use the restroom, it was no problem. I didn't have to wait until I got back from lecture to go to the restroom. I could just go to the restroom. And so stuff like that kind of overall reduced my total stress levels for not only myself, but my family. When I was at UCLA, one of the biggest inducers of stress was just nurses calling out randomly without any warning. And so what happened when that occurred was I would have to either have my friend, like, I had a really good friend that I met at student orientation that I'm still really good friends with, Eric. So sometimes he'd be able to come over and hang out with me until a nurse could come to change shifts. But if he couldn't or he was busy working, then my grandparents would have to come. And they're, in their 70s and they're 3 hours away, and they can't easily be expected to just drop what they're doing to come sit with me until the nurse can. So being that I was always at home for the online stuff, it was a lot less for me to worry about, allowing me to really improve my mental health and I think my academics as a whole.
Yeah, okay. Those are all really good comparisons.
Jen, what is it like living on campus as a disabled student?
I would describe it as feeling like a unicorn with leprosy. Um, let me elaborate. So, in many ways, I felt very accommodated by my school. I felt, even at times, like they were giving me special treatment, which I didn't always really like, but I appreciated because I saw it as compensation. And then there were other times where I felt special but isolated at the same time because there weren't many other students around me and in my environment, and actually any in my classes or in my track that were also suffering from a severe physical disability and trying to simultaneously be successful at a higher institute of learning with the demands that ours provided. So I felt like in many ways I could fit in because I had to learn how to do that as a young child and pretty much mastered making friends by the age of 6. Yet I still acknowledged on a regular basis and was reminded of that there's not going to be people with as much empathy for me as my family had, because this is not a situation that most students my age are confronted with so directly.
Dominic?
Yeah, I think you kind of summed it up perfectly. It's almost like you're always just the elephant in the room. Honestly, overall, my experience was really good at UCLA as a disabled student. I, would occasionally party with friends that I made because of my ability to overcome, I think, my disability, right? And connect with others despite it. And so, yeah, I have some really good memories of hanging out with friends, partying. I mean, if that's what the kids call it nowadays. And so, still though, there is, a type of stigma about disability that is persistent and pervasive among our peers in college, even. They're not always obvious. One of the ways that I kept myself busy when I was at UCLA was I actually DJ'd. And as corny as it sounds, I was DJ Rev back then. And DJ Rev got hired a lot by the residence hall people, the staff members, to DJ the events on campus, like at the res halls. But I never really got approached by anyone else outside of res hall staff to DJ. And I can't help but kind of wonder why. Like, I didn't think I was that bad. I'm not sure if it was that kind of stigma of me being in a chair, being different. But regardless, I was, still able to complete all my schoolwork there at UCLA. And in more of my hands-on classes, like my labs, for example, astronomy, I remember not having too many issues there, just needing help with the more physical labor aspect of it, like filling up beakers and taking measurements, stuff like that. My lab mates were usually my friends in the first place. They would handle all that stuff, and I would just type up the reports on my iPad like usual and send it to my professors accordingly. But yeah, that first year at UCLA, it was pretty smooth sailing compared to the second year because I had nurses that would show up pretty reliably. I don't remember having too many issues with nurses calling out that first year. And so my academics, I feel like, really took a turn for the worse the second year because of just all the drama that was going on with my nursing care in the background. It became a lot to add on to my mental plate, right? And it really took a toll on my ability to focus. So, yeah, overall, pretty good vibes, but definitely had some interesting or thought-inducing experiences, I'll say. So, Jen, what kind of accommodations do you receive as a disabled student? I know it's something that a lot of people out there that are looking to go to college will probably want to know more about. And I figured it'd be a good question to ask you since my accommodations are probably a little different.
Yeah, sure. So I registered with California Lutheran University's Disability Support Services Office when I first started attending here. And they have been really helpful in coordinating and enforcing my accommodation. So I actually receive, in terms of housing and academic accommodations, about 21 different accommodations in total. I'm not going to go through all of those with you because I think our listeners would probably end the podcast before I finished. Um, but I will say that some of the most important housing accommodations that I am approved for are the fact that I can reside in my apartment style suite without a meal plan. So that means that I am able to cook my own food and really take charge of my nutrition regimen because it is very specific. I do not have the ability to eat large quantities of food, so the food that I do eat needs to be highly nutritious and somewhat easy for me to chew as well. Um, and the fact that I do not eat large volumes of food meant that it would not be economically wise to be spending $6 to $7 on a meal swipe when I could make the amount of food that I'm actually going to eat for about $2 or less. And another really significant housing accommodation that I have is that I actually get my apartment to myself. I don't know how I managed to pull that off, but I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that is typically meant for 4 students. And it's just me, my care team, and my fish who occupy the other space. So um, I will say that it's really good to have that space also for the equipment that I've had to bring to school. As I'm sure Dominic knows, there's a lot of machinery involved with this. And my day-to-day routine is also dictated by the way I feel. So having the freedom to really, make my environment conducive to my needs is huge. And then in terms of my academic accommodations, one of the accommodations that I have is an assigned note taker. So my college coordinates and hires a note taker for each of my classes, and they are required to share their notes with me so that if I'm not able to take notes fast enough due to my mobility issues, I'm not missing too much of the lecture information. And then I am also allowed to bring my personal care aide with me to classes and have them assist me there, such as Dom mentioned. And I also have the ability to request up to a 2-day extension on writing assignments because there have been certain instances where I have planned my academic load for the week and health concerns or care staff related concerns have arisen and prevented me from following that plan as closely as I would have liked to. So having all of those accommodations allows me to take charge of the way that I need to coordinate all of my responsibilities.
Yeah, and similar to what you were saying about your apartment, I lived alone in a dorm, not a door, typically meant for 2 people. And I kind of needed the extra space like you were talking about because of all of our equipment. I don't want to list them all out, but just to kind of give the audience an idea, I have my power chair, I have a shower chair, I have a ventilator, a humidifier, a hospital bed. The list kind of goes on and on. And so it's always was one of my highest priorities when getting my accommodations in place was making sure I could live in a dorm that allowed me the space I need for my equipment and of course my nursing staff too. And then on top of that, I also needed an ADA bathroom because like I said, I have that shower chair. And so my nurse would transfer me into the shower chair and then roll me straight into the shower. There was no step or glass wall or door or anything in the way. It was all just roll straight in. And then for testing stuff, kind of similar to Jen, I got double time for all my exams. I had a scribe allowed to like fill in multiple choice exam bubbles for me. I was allowed to type essay exams on my iPad. And then, of course, needing time for suction breaks. Like I mentioned before, I have a tracheostomy, and because of that tracheostomy, I'm always kind of congested. My body sees it as a foreign body within me. And so, because of that, my lungs are constantly kind of creating mucus and phlegm to try to flush it out, even though they don't need to, and it's not meant to be flushed out. And so, because of this, I get super congested and I don't have the lung function to cough it out and clear my throat and my chest. I'm only rocking about 40%. So, yeah, I need time for suction breaks during exams too, because I need it randomly. And then I notice I tend to get more congested when I'm stressed or really busy. So I especially need those suction breaks during exams. But yeah, I had another question for you here, Jen. Have you ever been late to a class or an exam because of a caretaker? Because I have, and kind of sucks.
Um, so I have not let them, is my answer to that question. There have been instances where, maybe they were not ready to leave and I was, and I had class, imminently, and I had to get on the sidewalk and just start driving. And you know what? There was always another student there that was happy to open the door for me and move my chair until my care giver was able to make it to my class and then pick up assisting me. Um, but yeah, I prioritize attending class pretty highly. The only reason I would not attend is if I was ill and relied on equipment, every few minutes to make sure that I was able to breathe. Um, I was not I was not easily deterred, and I did not take people's bullshit. Uh, said, I have somewhere to be. It'd be great, and it's your job to be there with me, but you know, they're human too, so there's only so much you can control at the end of the day. And that is pretty much how I've been handling it since.
Yeah, I should have had that attitude back then when I was at UCLA. Stan, as you might remember from the story previously, he showed up late to work with me one day, I think, and it was the day of my final of like my last class. And I was already late, but we were walking to the exam slash rolling, and I was already thinking like, okay, we should be able to make it on time and be good. So we're halfway there, and he decides that we need coffee. And I'm like, dude, no. But he just ignores me, goes for the vending machine, grabs my wallet, or I forget if he bought, I don't really care. It was so annoying because he just literally made me late to my final because he thought and decided we should get coffee. I still made it to the final, and it wasn't like a huge deal. It's just I think a perfect example of kind of the annoyances or like the things that can happen when you rely on a caretaker or somebody else to help you while being a student. So I just wanted to mention that.
So, since we're on the topic, Jen, if you don't mind, could you give us an insight on logistics that you have to consider while away at school in terms of nursing, caregiving?
Yeah, so some of the responsibilities as my care staff manager that I have had to assume are hiring and everything that entails, the entire hiring process, learning how to create ads that people are actually going to want to respond to, um, being receptive to the communication when they do inquire, reach out about the job, knowing how to differentiate good fits from not so great fits, and really mustering that self-confidence. Even though I was very young, I understood that, like it or not, I'm going to be in charge of people who are most likely older than me, and they're not always going to feel comfortable with that as well. But that was just something I had to accept. And then one of the things that I'm responsible for as well, that I actually dislike the most about being a manager, is firing. There are definitely times, and I'm sure Dominic, you'll be nodding your head, um, that, certain caregivers and nurses that I've come to work with, um, at some point become ineffective at their job. And that can mean many different things. It means maybe they're not as reliable. Maybe they have some mental or emotional challenges that do not jive well with what you need. Um, or, they could be physical injuries as well. So, all different kinds of circumstances could turn a caregiver or nurse that was previously effective at working with you into someone who is not as effective on your team. And when that happens, you are faced with the kind of disillusioning reality that sometimes you have to fire people, even if you like them, even if you've, you know, grown to become sort of their friend. It's not an easy relationship to navigate. And I know that certain people with 24/7 care actually prefer to not become as close and friendly with their care staff. However, that is just not my personality and not how I operate. So I just understand that whoever I hire, if they don't work out, I am responsible for firing them as well. So I think that makes me more selective in the hiring process these days. And then I would say recently, it's been a challenge to hire and retain people for the amount of money that the state or the county is willing to pay them to work on my case. So the county program that funds my hours actually only pays below $18 an hour, and then we end up privately compensating to bring it up to $18.50. Because before we were doing that, number one, we were hardly getting any applicants. And number two, the applicants that we were getting were, I hate to be an asshole, but bottom of the barrel. And, I mean, as much as I love to empower people and encourage them to be better versions of themselves, it's not my job to, you know, take care of my team emotionally just so I justify them taking care of me physically. And I think that's a very important realization that has helped me to become a more effective boss, um, moving forward. So, yeah.
Dominic?
Yeah, no, again, I think you summed it up perfectly. The nature of the caregiver patient relationship is just innately intimate, I've always felt. And we're gonna do a whole episode on this coming up, I think, in the next week or so. But just to kind of touch on it, it's tough because as a patient, you need to be assertive for yourself, like Jen was talking about, while still being able to communicate non-aggressively. And so that's one of the biggest challenges I've always had. I always want to be friends with my nurses too. And I think it makes the job easier and they'll work better that way. but at the same time, it creates a difficult situation when you need to sit down and talk to them about something serious or even fire them, like Jen was talking about. But yeah, other than that, it's another thing is trying to find the balance between having personal space and needing help at the same time. What I would do when I was at UCLA, if I felt like I just needed some alone time, just wanting to sit in my dorm by myself for an amount of time, I would just ask my nurses to go get my mail because it was like a 10-15 minute walk to the mail room, and that would get them out of my room. It was a legit reason for them to leave and go help get the mail because sometimes I just did not feel up to driving all the way over there, standing in line, I mean sitting for, half an hour just to get some like spam. And so I would kind of use that as like an excuse to get them to leave. That way I could just have my own time, my own space. And then also on the other side of that, as a college student, I think one of the main experiences that you want to have is having fun with your friends, partying with friends, right? And it's always awkward trying to do that with a nurse attached to you. And so luckily, I've always had some pretty chill nurses that I was able to communicate openly with about situations like that and work through them so that the nurse would kind of just leave me be to go off with my friends, do what I wanted to do, come back and go back to the regular routine of being my nurse. And then of course wanting to have like private conversations with a friend or girlfriend slash boyfriend. At that time I was at UCLA. I was in a long distance relationship, and I always found myself having a hard time finding like that privacy with my girlfriend at the time. And so that's another thing that I wasn't really prepared for when I started that UCLA journey. But it's something that we as individuals living with disabilities who are attending college can definitely be better off for thinking about beforehand.
And if I can add on to the important point that you rose about needing personal space, even though we are highly dependent physically. Um, in my experience, I have had instances where I would share things with my care staff team that I thought, were pretty integral to like what was going on in my world. And I thought that they would respect my privacy, especially since I was no longer living under the authority of my parents. However, I found that when I wanted to do things or try things that their morals, their personal, morals and judgments didn't align with, um, that they were somewhat quick to breach my privacy and share things with my family that no 20-something-year-old should have to talk to their parents about. Um, and, it wasn't anything developmentally inappropriate. It was, exploring myself sexually with other people, that I was also getting to know, or, occasionally partaking in the uses of recreational marijuana and all of that good college fun. I was never really into drinking. But had I been, I'm sure they would have ratted on me for that too. So it actually came to a point where I had to draft um, a non-disclosure agreement and then have everyone on my care staff team review it, agree to it, and sign it. And then I went and got all of those contracts notarized. So now I have legal leverage to retain my own intimate privacy. Um, However, it's pretty ridiculous that I even had to go to those lengths, if you ask me, because I think everyone in this conversation can agree that as a developing, young adult, you need the freedom to express yourself and to experiment and to, you know, learn from your own behaviors instead of people telling you what you should and should not be doing. Dominic, what were some of the necessary logistics that you maybe couldn't or didn't anticipate about going away to school prior to attending UCLA?
Yeah, I think, and I said it before, the big one that stands out to me is what to do when a nurse calls out. Like I said, my grandparents are they were 3 hours away from UCLA. I had no immediate family in the area that was typically available to come at a moment's notice and sit with me if a nurse called out. And so if I could do it all, go back, do it all again, that's the one thing I would really try to hash out before moving to UCLA, is having that support system in place locally wherever you go to college, before actually moving in. And that would have saved me, I think, a lot less stress, right? If I knew that I had someone nearby to rely on 100% of the time when stressful things like nurses calling out happened. And so that just kind of leads me into saying, you have to have people in your life that you can rely on for stuff like that. Luckily, I always had like my friends such as Eric, such as Uriel now. He's my just caretaker now. But, it's just such a good idea to have a plan in place and people in your life that you can rely on to help you get through situations like that.
And Jen, since we're on the topic, what have been your strategies for navigating that professional relationship with your caregivers and nurses, social relationships, and romantic relationships while at college?
Yeah, so I would say that at this point in my life, I definitely have a lot of foresight, right? They say your foresight's 10/10 and your hindsight's, maybe 20/20. So that being said, I did not go into this endeavor having it all figured out. In fact, really the only mistake I'd be able to learn from at that point was, I wouldn't even call it a mistake, a misfortune, was Dominic's situation, where, his care staff fell through and it ended up being essential for him to have primary caregivers nearby. So I would say that that alleviated that stress for me. But um, as far as the kind of under the radar logistics that go into navigating all of these relationships, my motto or my thought process today is this. First, I identify what it is these people are going to expect from me. And then I identify, okay, what are the responsibilities that I actually have to these people? And number one, are they congruent? Do they agree? Are what people are expecting of me actually what they should be expecting of me, given the dynamics of the relationship? And from there, I'm kind of able to assess, okay, do I need to focus more on building rapport with this person, or do I need to focus more on reinforcing boundaries? In terms of, relationships with professors who have had to provide a lot of accommodation, I try to really put myself in their shoes. What is it that I'm actually supposed to be getting out of these experiences? Because I know it's not a headache and a sore wrist. And, if that is what happens to me every time I try to do my best, I need to change the way that I'm doing things. So just being very aware when things are not working and then not being able to try something different has served me quite well. In terms of social relationships, I did not make as many good friends or close friends in college as one might imagine, only because 20 to 24-year-olds tend to be fairly egocentric. Um, However, being my friend also means, at least being mindful about, the types of activities or places that they might invite me to join them at. Because, at a certain point, they understand that if it's not an accessible venue, I I simply will not be able to attend, whether I like it or not. So just finding people who have that understanding and who are willing to spend that extra energy to include you, is really crucial. And then in terms of my romantic relationships, I was actually in a very long-term 5-year relationship from the time I was 15 until I was 20. And he was my first boyfriend. We were each other's first kisses, we took each other's virginities. We, you know, taught each other basically everything that we had learned up until that point about being a partner. And then after that, I found myself in the unique situation of being 20 years old and having no idea how to date as an adult. And when I say date, I do not mean be in a relationship. I mean sift through the dumpsters of Gen Z that Bumble and Tinder have become. And let me tell you, there are so many people that are not right for us that it can almost become demotivating to keep trying after a while. But my motto is you beat the brick wall hard, enough times, even if it's with your fist, eventually you'll wear it down. So, persistence is key. And I just had to kiss a lot of frogs before I found a prince that would carry my ass. And even then, understanding, you know, that you need to keep, what you need physically in terms of extra assistance separate from what their responsibilities are as a partner is also very crucial.
Yeah, would you? And Dominic, same question to you. How do you balance it?
I'll just kind of add on that I think what helps me a lot is compartmentalizing. Um, yes, I am a person living with a physical disability that requires 24/7 help from a nurse or caregiver. And yes, I also have friends. And yes, I have also been in romantic relationships. And what helps me kind of balance all those is keeping them separate from each other. I have my caregiver relationships, I have my friend relationships, and I have my romantic relationships all separate. And I try not to let how one relationship is going impact another. For instance, if I have a disagreement with a friend or a romantic partner, I try not to let that influence how I treat my nurses or my caretakers. I always like to show my appreciation for those that are helping me. And I was taught to say like please and thank you from a very young age. And so I really try to make sure that sticks with me, regardless of how frustrated or how bad of a day I may be having. And I think that serves me well, is just being able to separate all those relationships and again kind of roll that thin line between balancing my nurses as my nurses and balancing them as friends as well. So yeah.
Jen, what is your advice for disabled individuals on the fence about attending higher education?
I would say that if it's something that they want to do, they should absolutely do it. However, school is not everyone's first choice right after they get out of high school. And I don't think that just because you have a physical disability and you know that you're not going to be able to work at like an unskilled labor job, like at McDonald's or, you know, delivering for Amazon, that you should not be pressured into rushing into a degree or a program that you're not 110% passionate about. Um, because I had a little bit of a career path or yeah, career path change after my freshman year in college. And I went in thinking that I was going to be a psych major and also do all the prereqs I needed for med school so that I could go on to become a psychiatrist. And I thought that that would be a good fit because, I have always been really knowledgeable and interested in the medical field. And then I had this other, second love of social science and psychology, and that seemed like a happy crossroad. However, um, during my freshman year, second semester, I took a seminar for pre-health students that kind of laid out the timeline and everything that is involved academically and professionally when trying to um, be competitive and apply to these medical schools. So, with all that being disillusioned for me, I ended up changing my career goal to psychologist, clinical psychologist. And that way, the classes that I would need to take for my psych program were not an entirely different set of classes than the classes I would need to complete to be pre-med. And to be honest, I could not be more happier that I did not spend 2 years hitting my head against a textbook in biology and instead got to meet some really incredible faculty and some really great fellow students who have shared like interests. And I think that ultimately I chose the right path, but it's not always going to be that clear and predetermined when you start. So do not let anyone push you into anything that you do not feel is, related to your passion or your vocation, where you could really see yourself taking off in. And so, Dom, like how do you feel, um, about some of the points that I've raised, and what do you think is important to tell people who are on the fence about attending?
Yeah, I think it's important not to push people into doing something they're not comfortable with, like you were talking about. More specifically, I would advise people to really think about and identify your strengths and keep them in mind when choosing a school and a major. Because if it's something that you enjoy studying or learning more about that you're good at, it's going to be that much more easier to do the coursework, both mentally and physically, despite any limitations you might be having. And I think I'm kind of like the perfect example of that. Like I was talking about earlier, I really struggled with my math courses for psychology, specifically my statistics courses. And I knew before even college that I wasn't good at math. But I just figured, what the heck? Like, there won't be that much math in college in psychology, not doing the research, right? And so, once I got to college and taking the courses, going through them, I was like, dude, like, I don't know about this. And so when I started struggling academically because of that, on top of my ongoing nursing care issues and those stressors, I talked to a counselor at UCLA about steps I could take to kind of rectify that problem. And so I mentioned communication to the counselor, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like we can transfer you to a comm major. Like that sounds good." And that was honestly the best decision I've probably ever made because I was so much more comfortable doing comm coursework, and I just felt it was so relatable and universal. I could practice it every day, and that was considered homework. And I just felt like it was so much more enjoyable for me because of that, and easier for me to do as a result. So yeah.
Yes, and as that well-known 70s song goes, listen to your heart.
Oh
Before,
yeah. Sing it, girl.
but uh,
Any resources either of you would recommend to others planning to attend college? Jen?
yeah, so I would say the Department of Rehab um really assisted me financially. So I know that Dominic has had his own experiences with them, and I'm not going to touch on those, but for me, the greatest benefits that they were able to offer was tuition assistance, and then also paying for, textbooks, um, and everything that would normally be a financial toll on a student because I was not able to also have a part-time job. And they understood that in order for me to have the best chance of being successful as a student in college and later as a professional, that I would need to put all my focus that I could muster into my coursework and not having to worry about obtaining additional funds. So they were really helpful with that. I would definitely recommend if you are anyone who needs any type of educational accommodation, whether or not it is physical, you have the ability to register and apply with the Department of Rehab if you're in the state of California, and they are obligated to help you attain your educational and professional goals, whatever that means for you. However long the education track is, they are obligated to assist. So please, please, please utilize that resource. Even if you have ADHD, even if you have depression, even if you have, really high functioning autism, and you were able to be successful in high school, they do have resources. Do not let them go unused.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on, DOR is great because it's free. There's literally nothing lost. There's no pain, nothing lost by just reaching out to them, opening up a case and saying, "Hey, like can you guys help me get through school? You have literally nothing to lose by at least just checking. Like Jen was saying, they'll work with you regardless of your level of mobility or any other type of challenge you may be experiencing. And so that's the resource I was going to recommend right off the bat too, DOR. And I think you can actually just Google vocational rehabilitation near me, and it should pop up with the nearest office in your state. So it's a free resource, really great. They've helped me and Jen out a ton. Again, like Jen was saying, they helped pay for books, for tuition. I think they even helped me pay for like 2 hours of nursing care a day. And so it's stuff like that that you don't want to let go without looking into. So check them out.
Right. And then another one that I would like to mention or re-mention, because I did briefly mention earlier, is at my school, it's called Disability Support Services. However, at most colleges and universities, there is some type of disability support office personally employed to help us with these accommodations and ensure that we're getting them. So I would say the only thing standing in your way is your fear of asking. Once you get over that and you're able to ask diplomatically and you know what you need, it's all up and up from there.
Yep. Again, just to kind of reverb what we've been saying, you have to be your own advocate and really assert yourself and say what you need, because otherwise you won't get it.
All right, so Uriel, I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the ways that caregivers and social allies can best support people with disabilities who want to attend college? You know, what have been your experiences and what might others try in addition?
Hmm. That's a good question. So I wasn't a caregiver for Dominic during college, but both of you touched on some very important keys or notes that if your provider is attending college, it's important to understand that communication is extremely important, just in general for caregivers or nursing, whether it be at college or at home, just in general, it needs to be super important. And you have to establish boundaries pretty early on, like the do's and don'ts, what makes them uncomfortable, what makes them comfortable, because if they're attending college, you need to keep in mind that they're still young adults and they're still developing as people. And because of that, it's important not to take things personally. And you had mentioned how some caretakers had personal beliefs, whether it be religion or whatever, that sometimes got in the way. And I think it's important to put all those stuff aside to prioritize their care and their needs, because ultimately you're getting paid to help them. And again, if they're attending college, it's their experience. And like Dom said, it's very important to establish those boundaries and and establish that communication with them where if they tell you, can I get some alone time? Not to take that personally and respect that, especially if they have friends over, and it's very important not to parent them. Because Dominic had told me a story where some of his caregivers would get a little annoyed or frustrated because some of his friends would come over and throw their feet on the table and just do typical young adult stuff. Right. And it's important that we're not parenting here. We're here to provide care for them. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, even if it's not at college or just being a provider or a caregiver or a recipient, my bad. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, got that IHSS lingo down, buddy.
There you go.
Which stands for In-Home Supportive Services.
Yep.
Those of you who may not know.
Another great resource that we probably should have mentioned already, for those that are looking to go to college that need care. IHSS is probably going to be your number one kind of resource for that too.
And it may be called something in other states, but that is what it's called in California. And it's typically coordinated by the Human Services Agency, whatever that may be in your land of origin.
All right, Jen, one last question for you. As we briefly mentioned in the intro of the episode, people often make the abstract or unfounded association between a physical disability and cognitive challenges. On the first episode of the podcast, I talked about how the woman I ran into at Walmart was just shook at the fact that I didn't go to UCLA to see doctors, but to study psychology. Have you ever experienced something like this? And if so, how has it impacted your desire to pursue academia?
Yeah, so I would say that to expect people in the world we live in to not be ignorant about our capabilities is not realistic. Um, so basically, I take that as a sign and as a symptom of their ignorance. And I try to not take that personally. And I actually try to have a lot of compassion for them because I understand that maybe they have not been exposed to, successful um, individuals in wheelchairs who have been able to excel in school and at work. And I think that the best thing that we can do is try to normalize it. Try to say, actually, it's not that inspiring. It's just me answering what I was brought here to do. And then, Uriel, to hand the mic back to you, can you please share how you've been able to help combat this stigma as an advocate for the disabled community and now as Dominic's caregiver?
I met Dominic at a pretty early age and it became normal to me. And it's a hard thing to fight because it's like, I don't want to say impossible, but it's really hard to squash down that stigma and that ignorance in people. However, it is necessary and essential that we do raise awareness and also like speak up whenever there is ableism. That way we can open up the dialogue and inspire others to care.
Right. And just to add on to that, ignorance is truly only dangerous when it's accompanied by apathy. If someone doesn't know, you can teach them. If they don't know and they don't care, that is a completely different demon.
Yeah, and just to add on and kind of wrap up, I know we're running a little long on the episode here. I liked what you were saying, Uri, about how it's hard to counter that stigma because I think one of the main reasons it is hard to counter is the fact that we talked about earlier, that statistic saying that only like 1.5% of individuals with a physical disability or dexterity issue are in college, right? Or was that the statistic that we read? And so how can we avoid that stigma when it's obviously true? So I'm kind of raising a call to action for everybody out there that is hesitant or tentative about going to college, like go for it. Let's be better. We can do better, so let's be better, right? If you liked what we had to say today and you want to help us encourage others dealing with mobility challenges to achieve higher education, please leave us that rating, perhaps a nice little review, and be sure to share with your family and friends. If you're not already, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Disability Myth, all one word. We're also on YouTube now. And yeah, that's my final plugs. Any final thoughts, guys?
You only live once, so don't be a pussy.
There you go.
You heard it here first, folks.
Heard it here first. All right, guys. Peace and love. And you know the drill. May the force be with you.